Greetings again everyone. I'm on a bit of a secret quest at the moment to test just about every 50mm and 85mm lens I can get my hands on. Today I've come across Nikon's latest offering for their Z mount mirrorless cameras, their Z85mm f1.8s. It's a full frame lens that costs $700 in the US, or about £700 here in the UK, so it's on the pricey side, but not ridiculously expensive. As I mentioned already, this is just for Nikon Z mount mirrorless cameras. It won't work at all on their older digital SLRs. I really enjoyed testing this lens out. I managed to get some quite interesting sample pictures with it. I'd like to thank Nikon UK for loaning me this lens for a couple of weeks, although as usual this is a totally independent review. A bright aperture 85mm lens is an excellent choice for portrait, subject and event photography, letting in a lot of light into your camera and giving you quite strongly out of focus backgrounds, particularly when used on a full frame camera. But it's not such a long telephoto focal length that it can't be used for all kinds of photographic work, including landscape and street photography. Most manufacturers market an f1.4 lens as being their premium option, so this Nikon f1.8 lens will only let in about a third as much light as an f1.4, and that's important to bear in mind. But being f1.8 does at least mean it can be less expensive, smaller and lighter than lenses with brighter apertures. Well, let's take a look at the lens's build quality first. The design of Nikon Z mount lenses has been pretty homogeneous so far, and this one is no exception. It's quite large, and its design is simple and business-like. It weighs 470 grams, or just over a pound. The rear of the lens and its mount are made of metal, and we get a thin weather sealing gasket here too. There's a switch for auto and manual focus, followed by a metallic manual focus ring. It turns very smoothly and it changes your focus quite responsively. As you can see here, there's a fair bit of focus breathing when you do. The lens's autofocus motor works silently and pretty quickly. The focus mechanism was accurate in my tests and very useful with the eye autofocus mode on my Z7 camera. The rest of the lens's barrel is made of plastic, which is solid enough but doesn't feel quite as high quality as the rest of the lens. Something else to notice is that this lens does not feature a control ring, just a manual focus ring, and it does not have image stabilization, although most new Nikon cameras have it built in nowadays. The lens comes with a cloth pouch and a lens hood, which is also made of plastic, and the filter thread size is 67mm. Overall, it's quite a plain lens in its outward design, but it's solid and works very nicely, particularly the autofocus motor. Alright, let's take a look at image quality now. We'll be testing it on a Nikon Z7 camera, which has a 45MP full frame sensor and a 20MP APS-C mode too. Let's start in full frame mode. At f1.8 we see excellent sharpness in the middle of the image. Excellent, but it does shy away from perfection. Contrast is just good. The image quality in the corners is also excellent, just as good. We don't really see any degradation at all, and that's quite an achievement for a lens mounted onto a 45MP full frame camera. Stop down to f2.8 and the corners look the same, but brighter, and back in the middle, sharpness and contrast have edged forward a little, bringing us spectacular image quality there. f4 remains just as perfect in the middle of the image, and corner image quality remains excellent. The lens stays this sharp as you stop down to f11, although as usual, if you stop down as far as f16, you'll begin to notice some softness emerging from the effect of diffraction. Overall though, that's an excellent performance on such a high resolution full frame sensor. Now let's see how the lens performs in APS-C mode for anyone who's using one of Nikon's APS-C Z mount cameras. At f1.8, sharpness in the middle looks very good, but again not perfect. The corners still look great though, as you might expect. Stop down to f2.8 and those corners look perfect, and so does the middle now. The image stays this sharp until you stop down to f11, where a little softness emerges from diffraction, and f16 looks really quite soft now. Still, on an APS-C camera, that's a very good performance overall, although a 20MP sensor isn't the most challenging. Let's take a look at distortion and vignetting on a full frame camera. In-camera corrections are turned off for these pictures. As you can see, the lens projects some negligible pincushion distortion, nothing you'll ever notice in real life. At f1.8, vignetting in the corners is only moderate. I've seen a lot worse than this before. Stop down to f2.8 and the corners become almost completely bright, so that's a very good performance overall. Next, close-up image quality. The lens can focus down to 80 cm, a little closer than average for an 85mm optic, although it still won't be mistaken for a macro lens. At f1.8, the close-up image quality is a bit ghostly, a little soft. f2.8 is a little better, and at f4 we finally see some good sharpness, so when you're shooting very close up, stop down the lens for best results. Now let's see how the lens works against bright lights. Not very well actually. We see quite a lot of contrast when bright lights are in or near the image, and a fair bit of flaring too. You'll definitely want to shoot with the lens's hood on to tame that down a bit. Now let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh, a very important question for a portrait lens. On the whole, it's really nice and soft, with even quite complex backgrounds being smoothly rendered without any ugly highlighting. It looks great really, although one minor issue is that bokeh highlights take on a cat's eye shape quite easily the more you look away from the centre of the image. And finally, related to bokeh is longitudinal chromatic aberration. At f1.8, it's surprisingly strong on this lens, considering the nice quality of its bokeh in general. We see blue and magenta bokeh highlights around the plane of focus here. Those colours remain at f2.8 and even f4, although at f5.6 they are finally under control. So then, overall, this lens has lovely build quality, making it a pleasure to use, and its main image quality strengths are fantastic sharpness and very smooth bokeh. Those two attributes alone are often enough to make most photographers very happy, and the low distortion and vignetting are a nice bonus too. The softer close-up image quality and longitudinal chromatic aberration, as well as that work against bright lights, are a mild shame, and video makers might be a little bothered by that focus breathing. But you can't have everything, and generally speaking, it's a pretty gorgeous lens. It's certainly on the expensive side for an f1.8 option, so I wouldn't say it's great value for money, but it's also a lot sharper than other, less expensive 85mm lenses, and there aren't really many other options on the Nikon Z system yet anyway, so it does have to come recommended.